One Focus Radio.
Welcome to the show, it's Dyer's Daily. Keeping in the know, it's Dyer's Daily. We've got chat, we've got discussion, nice and slow, ain't no rushing, reading emails and events. Sometimes he makes no sense. It's time to start the show, it's Dyer's Daily. He'll be there in a mo, it's Dyer's Daily. We've got plays, we've got interviews, even stuff that's in the news. Local and otherwise, come and try it on for size, it's Dyer's Daily.
Welcome to the edition of Dyer's Daily for Thursday the 15th of November 2018. The month is certainly going rather fast. In today's edition, I pay tribute to comic book legend, or overall media legend, Stan Lee, who has sadly passed away at the age of 95 this year. So, we'll be talking about that and other things in today's edition of Dyer's Daily. But first, let's hear from other podcast creators.
There were columns of soldiers trying to get onto the small boats.
A shell holiday, that's the more frightening experience I've had.
25 yards, ramp going down, now.
We did anything to get a couple of days sick. We used to put the finger on the line and let one of the lads hit it with a hammer.
We hurled ourselves upon one another with a fury that afterwards we could not understand.
Yeah, we crash landed in the field.
Imagine the shock when the pick clangs against steel. You wonder if you've started the clock ticking. Fighting Through Podcast. Great unpublished history.
Was A Quiet Place inspired by Signs, It Comes at Night, and War for the Planet of the Apes? Was Ready Player One influenced by Avatar, Wreck-It Ralph, and The Last Starfighter? Is The Hurricane Heist more influenced by Sharknado or Geostorm? These are the kinds of questions my guest co-hosts and I discuss on my podcast, Piecing It Together. Every week we look at a new movie and try to figure out what other movies inspired it. Whether it's the story, the character development, tone, or even use of music. Every movie was influenced by something that came before, and we want to figure out what. Check out Piecing It Together on your favorite podcast app, or check us out on piecingpod.com. You can also follow us on social media at piecingpod. Piecing It Together is a part of the All Points West podcast network.
Dyer's Daily.
Before we start Thursday's edition of Dyer's Daily, let me say a very heartwarming thank you to Paul Cheall from the Fighting Through podcast, who sent me a lovely email earlier this week, and he is currently being advertised at the front of this show on and off, and has been for the past week or two. So thank you to Paul for your kind comments. And he wanted to tell me, actually, he emailed to tell me that I had 6 downloads, not 5, in relation to something that I said, and also said it wasn't really bad for a start. He started with just 7 a day for ages, and then he's just heard that he's number 57 in the history charts for the UK, and he also wanted me to know that he's been enjoying the show. He loves the intro music. There'll be more of that in a future podcast. I'm working on something with that, and he loves the kind of feel of the show and the way that it's all pieced together. So thank you, Paul Cheall from the Fighting Through podcast. It's good to know that I've got at least one fan out there. Now, speaking of fans, there is a guy who had millions of fans out there, especially if they were into comic books. Every guy who knew about comic books was probably a fan of this guy, or could certainly thank him for some kind of contribution. He is the man who co-created numerous fictional superheroes, including Spider-Man, the X-Men, Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk, the Fantastic Four, Black Panther, Daredevil, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man. So many names. And sadly, the man behind all these things, and is in many movies as well in cameo roles, sadly died at the age of 95 on the 12th of November this year. Stan Lee, who will be sadly missed, is an absolute legend. Even if you don't know anything about the world of comic books, you know Stan Lee's name. Absolutely. An absolute figure in that world. You know, I'm not really big on superhero movies. I've played a couple of video games based on superhero properties, but personally, sorry geeks and nerds out there, I am just not a big fan of them. I find them a little bit problematic. I don't mind the Superman radio series, that's not too bad, but some of them I just can't get into it. But Stan Lee's thoughts and contribution to the world of media and comics in particular is something that I both admire and certainly appreciate. You know, he did lots of different things. He also served in World War II. He did lots of different projects, but of course he is mainly known these days for being in the different movies that his characters have spawned. And I think he wanted to break Hitchcock's record. I'm not sure whether he ever did that or not. I would imagine so, because although Hitchcock made a lot of movies, I don't think he has quite... I don't know. I wouldn't be prepared to comment. In fact, if anybody wanted to come on here and tell me, by the way, any of this information, or at least talk about it, I would be most welcome to, to that idea, because I certainly love talking to people. And it seemed as well that this whole comic book convention thing, this kind of media convention, science fiction stuff that's come really massive in the last 20 years, I would imagine it's something to do with the increase in activity because of social media and the internet. But I can't be sure. I mean, I know they were popular. I've seen videos from Doctor Who conventions from the 80s, but I don't think they were quite on the scale that they are now, which really intrigues me. And certainly somebody like Stan Lee, at the age of 90 odd, could have just said, no, I don't want to bother being around fans, but he loved it. He loved being around fans, he loved talking to people, and certainly attended a lot of those conventions. He is a face who appeared in a lot of movies. As I say, his name's on a lot of work. I mean, Spider-Man, just for a start. Take Spider-Man. It spawned comic books, cartoon series, several movies, several reboots, several different things, video games. I remember playing the Spider-Man video game in the 90s, early 2000s. I mean, that is just one character. Think about how many reboots Fantastic Four has had, or any of those things. X-Men, the cartoon series in the 90s with the catchy theme tune. These are all things that were co-created by Stan Lee. So it's a humongous contribution to the entertainment world as a whole, not just comic books, but to everything else, because we know that certainly the most popular thing for a media organisation to do is to adapt something. And when you've got something that is as popular or perhaps as mainstream as some of his material is, that's a pretty safe bet, isn't it? That you're going to produce something successful. Unfortunately, a few of the Spider-Man reboots have not been that successful, but you know what? It still gets people going. I mean, they've just released the Venom movie, which is based in the Spider-Man universe. And that, again, is probably the creation of Stan Lee. So it's an incredible contribution to the world of media, and a guy with lots of fans. And I'll tell you something as well, I know this is quite common for people to say, but if I've achieved even half of what he achieved in his very long life, then I've done very well, because he certainly achieved a lot in that time. And of course he could have been, like I said, he could have gone into retirement and gone, no, not going to do anymore. And yet he become a figurehead for the whole Marvel universe, which is just wonderful, isn't it? Absolutely wonderful. So, where do we go from here? It's the year is really going fast for me. It's just going really, really fast. And certainly the winter time is a time when we start to see some people struggling with the cold, and You know, it's always sad turning on the news and seeing these things. I'm involved in many different projects, and I've had to compile stuff about Stan Lee for other things. So I'm always keeping an eye out for these things. So that's why I talk about them on here, really, because they're kind of at the centre of my mind, and they're at the centre of everybody's mind who are interested in that world. I mean, a lot of those characters, like I say, I've never really been a comic book reader. I kind of want to understand it, or I want to get into it, but I think we've probably missed the boat on that in terms of me being into comic books. Although, there is still time. I did find myself watching episodes of 1980s game show Starcade, where they play arcade games, and a lot of them, the contestants that went on there, were collectors of comic books. Now, certainly I love video games, so it's probably a certainty, isn't it, that I'd like comic books as well. But never mind. If anyone can recommend any comic books, that would be good. Yeah, let us know. Email dyersdaily@southwavesaudio.co.uk. Tell me what comic book I should pick up. What has grabbed you? It can be Stan Lee or it cannot. You know, whichever. Let's cast it open and wide. I would love to hear from you on this subject. We'll put something on the social media, of which I shall mention in just a moment. Yes, I really do need to start checking out more comic books and different things, because there's all sorts of things. As a content creator, it's kind of a needs must, isn't it? Right, that brings us to the end of today's Dyers Daily, but thank you very much for listening. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. I will be back tomorrow for another edition. Go onto the Facebook page, which is South Waves Audio. We'll be asking all sorts of questions on there, so be sure to catch us on the next edition. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. This has been a South Waves Audio production.